Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kelsey Bergfeld. I am the Coalition Manager for Advocates for Ohio's Future. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit coalition of organizations throughout the state of Ohio that fight for policies that support health and human service policies that support mostly our poorest Ohioans, poorest families and children. So today we are going to talk about kind of where we're at with the state budget process that's been going on for the past few months, especially what's happening within the House right now, and the Senate has kicked off with informal hearings this week as well. A little bit later, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into temporary assistance for needy families, or TANF funding and spending throughout the state of Ohio. We'll have Tara Britton, our AOF co-chair and also Director of Public Policy and Advocacy with the Center for Community Solutions, joining us in just a few moments. So we will go ahead and get started with an outlook on House Bill 166, which is the operating budget at the moment. So last Friday, or 2 Fridays ago at this point, over 2,000 amendments were submitted by both members of the House Republicans and Democrats towards the state budget. They had an original objective to review all those amendments and come up with their sub-bill, which is their introduction of what the House policies are from the governor's version of the budget. So it should look a lot different. And this is really where the House kind of lays out their priorities and spending priorities for the next General Assembly. They had originally thought that they could go through those amendments by April 24th, which was this past Wednesday. Unfortunately, we did not see the sub-bill. We are anticipating seeing it hopefully next Monday or Tuesday of next week, but we are at the moment in a bit of a waiting period to see kind of what those changes are, what amendments got into the bill, what didn't get into the bill, and just kind of see what the House's ideas are moving forward. So after we see the sub-bill, there will be a second round of amendments usually. It's an opportunity, one more opportunity for House members to have their amendments and changes put into the bill. It's also an opportunity for LSC, which is the drafting commission within the state, to kind of fix any change or any mistakes that they may have made within the bill. And again, should have happened by this Friday. Unfortunately, everything seems to be pushed back a week at this point. And again, their original objective was to have a vote on the House floor by next week. Unfortunately, again, that doesn't seem like it will be happening as we move forward. Next week, we will again hope to see the sub-bill and see what changes are have been made. So we went ahead and, with our meeting of the minds here, we came up with a new proposed timeline as we move forward with the process. So next week, again, hopefully we see that sub-bill. We've heard from members of leadership within the House that their objective is for a full House floor vote on May 9th. So that would be not next week, but the following week. And in that time, we'll see the sub-bill, we'll see an omnibus amendment, a vote from the full House Finance Committee, and then finally a vote on the full House floor by May 9th, again, as their objective. If we follow their original thoughts as to timeline after, the House kind of hands it officially over to the Senate, the House originally thought they could have conference committee from June 20th to the 26th, and then a full final vote on that conference committee report on June 26th. We're keeping in mind that the deadline for the governor's signature to complete the process on the budget, that includes any veto reports and such, is June 30th. That's the last day of the state fiscal year before we move into the next state fiscal year. So we are working on a timeline here and hope we can continue to meet these objectives. So what's the holdup? So why we keep kind of pushing this timeline back? A couple of the major issues within the House that I know members have been discussing is the K through 12 education funding plan. So two representatives, Representatives Cupp and Patterson in the House, took the past year or so to develop their new school funding plan more equitable across districts and to really kind of address some of those districts that are struggling a little bit more. And as we know, Ohio's K through 12 school funding plan has been unconstitutional for about 20 years at this point due to an over-reliance on property taxes. So this is something that I know House members have really taken to heart. Some of the early projections from the school funding plan didn't direct resources to some of the poorest districts instead. So I know House members are looking to kind of tweak with that funding plan to see if they can increase some benefits to some of our less affluent school districts. Another big issue we see House members debating is the state appropriation limit. This is a limit on how much GRF or an increase in GRF, general revenue funds, the governor can spend and make investments in his budget. So Governor DeWine has a number of large investments in his introduced budget, ranging in areas from funding for clean water and the school system, and increased investments in a variety of different departments and programs. So right now, as his budget was introduced, it is under the state appropriation limit, but it is a little bit too close for some members' comfort, to say the least. And they have some objections on, again, how close we are getting to that state appropriation limit. The last thing that's kind of tripping up House members as they make changes to the proposed budget, conflicting revenue forecasts. When the governor made his original budget, he was working off of a set of revenue forecasts that were a little bit more generous than what the Legislative Service Commission has deemed appropriate for the next biennium. There's a difference of about $700 million is the last update that we heard from that. Again, there will be new revenue forecasts as the budget progresses and kind of new numbers to hit. But at the moment, I know the House is looking for maybe some adjustments they can make to accommodate kind of a less rosy revenue forecast for the next couple months and years. So this week, the Senate process also kicked off. They held informal hearings on the budget. Again, they don't have the bill formally in their hands at the moment. They won't again for the next couple weeks. They had, I know, OBM, LSC, and a number of departments come in and testify to full Senate Finance this past week. And then according to the timeline that they laid out at the beginning of the process, they will have subcommittee hearings when they break out into more directed smaller groups to hear different parts of the budget next week and the following week. We do have a couple committee agendas for next week. Looks like especially we're very concerned with the Health and Human Service Subcommittee. They are hearing invited testimony from a number of boards and commissions within the Health and Human Service realm. So there will be no public testimony yet in the Senate as of next week for the Health and Human Service Subcommittee specifically. So we are looking at subcommittee hearings the week of May 6th. That's also the week that the House plans on voting out their version of the budget. So this timeline doesn't seem like the Senate very more their first kind of amendment deadline. So we do anticipate the Senate giving themselves a little bit more time to consider what the House has passed once that does happen. So again, working off what the House and Senate had originally set deadlines for conference committee, June 20th to 26th. Hopefully a vote in the Senate on the conference committee report later that week. All right, and again, please feel free to answer or ask any questions about timeline and any kind of things that we anticipate coming up in the budget in the next couple weeks within the webinar. We'd be happy to take your questions. But for right now, we are going to turn it over to Tara Britton. She is the co-chair of Advocates for Ohio's Future and also the director of public policy and advocacy for the Center for Community Solutions. She's going to share some about temporary assistance for needy families funding in the state budget, which has been a hot topic.
Thanks, Kelsey. Good morning, everyone. Is it still morning? Yes, it is. Happy Friday. And thanks for joining us today to hear more about the progress on the state budget, as well as kind of one of our deep dives into a policy area that we have been spending a lot of time with at the Center for Community Solutions, but also discussing at the AOF table. So I wanted to kind of give everyone a sense of where things stand with the as introduced budget from the governor and what they are now calling the TANF Services Framework, previously known to many as the TANF Spending Plan. And we definitely got a lot more detail around the spending, revenue and expenses both in the TANF budget this time around. Have a much better sense of where we are, I think, in terms of the budget. Obviously, still some questions to answer, and I think the overall concern and the word of the day here as it relates to TANF is sustainability for the programs that TANF is funding in the state. So just for some quick background, TANF is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. It was the result of welfare reform in the mid-90s, and we now have, more than 20 years later, a program that provides a multitude of services to low-income families. I think what it's primarily kind of known for is the cash assistance piece of the program in Ohio. That's called Ohio Works First. And that also comes now, again, 23 years post-welfare reform. The program involves work requirements for any able-bodied adult in the program, and only families with children are eligible to receive cash assistance. So we're talking about parents who are required to work a set amount of hours per week in order to receive the cash assistance benefits. Also a change in the mid-90s was the creation of TANF, or the formation of TANF into a block grant program as opposed to an entitlement. So whereas previously everyone eligible who applied could be enrolled in the program and receive cash assistance benefits, in the mid-90s this turned into a block grant, which is always talked about or discussed in a way that offers states more flexibility with how their programs are designed. So we'll talk a little bit here in a few minutes about how our program dollars are used in the state of Ohio. In addition to the sort of formation of this program into a block grant, the state is required to provide a maintenance of effort amount. So you'll see here on the screen, our block grant is around $725 million. Our maintenance of effort is around $417 million. Those are have not adjusted with inflation. Those are the amounts that were set in 1996. So as you can imagine, 23 years later, things have having those fixed amounts essentially erodes the reach of the program when everything else is being adjusted for inflation, and this block grant is not. So moving on, this is kind of where we are right now with TANF revenue sources. This was included in the TANF services framework that I mentioned earlier that we received alongside the presentation of the Department of Job and Family Services budget a few weeks back, when the director of the agency testified before the Health and Human Services Subcommittee of the House Finance Committee. So what we're looking at here is, the first line shows us the time frame we're looking at for the state fiscal year 2018. Those are the actual figures. We are currently in state fiscal year 19. That will end June 30th. And then we're looking ahead, obviously, to state fiscal years 2020 and 2021. But this obviously goes out several more years. And I'll talk about why we're looking at a couple of years ahead here in a moment. I'm going to jump down to the maintenance of effort resources. So again, this is a pretty much fixed amount, a few $1 million difference there, but that's just a result of, I think, what we're contributing as our maintenance of effort in the state. But we always meet the minimum threshold. That row there titled TANF Sustainability Fund Balance. This is also a new term we're dealing with this budget go around, but as you may recall in prior discussions, I think we've probably talked about it in other webinars and certainly at AOF meetings, we've worked toward identifying the TANF underspend. So that's something that the Center for Community Solutions wrote a pretty detailed report about last fall, looking at identifying what the amount that has gone unspent in the TANF budget, and these are unspent federal dollars, over the last several years. And so we had estimated that amount at about $570 million back in the fall, based on some information that we had obtained from the Department of Job and Family Services. So pretty close there in terms of what this is showing us for fiscal year 18 and 19. You'll see that sustainability fund balance is spent over the course of the next biennium and the first year of the 2022-23 biennium. So by the end of state fiscal year 2023, because you see a zero there, or a dash, we have no TANF underspend remaining. And I think we still have, I think, some questions, certainly, about that piece of the budget. What we know is that it is allocated to be spent on implementing the Step Up to Quality measures for the publicly funded child care program. So child care is a big portion of what we spend our TANF dollars on in the state of Ohio. It's a core TANF program, an important work support for families, and it's important that kids are in quality child care settings. Obviously, the concern here is around sustainability when you see that amount is declining over the next several years and is gone in the years following that. So I think we can probably move on to the next slide, but I don't want to drive everyone too crazy with numbers here, but kind of getting back to this core piece of the TANF program and what we're aiming to do. I won't read through these, but these are the four purposes of TANF. And, I talked about cash assistance, I talked about child care. The other piece of the program that significant amount of dollars are spent on are kind of those other support wraparound services in Ohio. Those are spent through what we call our prevention, retention, and contingency program. So those are to try to avoid families needing to get on cash assistance. It's trying to help them avoid any sort of emergency. So those dollars can be used for car repairs or to buy supplies for work or your uniform for work, a myriad of things, and each county has a different plan on how they'll spend their prevention, retention, and contingency, or PRC dollars. So I just kind of wanted to remind everyone of the purposes of TANF, but all of the things we're talking about here certainly drive back to these core purposes of TANF. This is what we're really talking about in terms of the major expenses of the program. Again, I talked about child care. I talked about Ohio Works First cash assistance. As it relates to those PRC dollars, those are spent through the county departments of Job and Family Services, and they can contract out to local partners to provide services that are eligible to be paid for with TANF dollars. So those are kind of the core pieces of the program, again, driving back at those core purposes of the TANF program. There are other expenses in the program, so smaller portions, and I have a pie chart coming up here that kind of shows the breakout, but these are other sources of TANF dollars, the Association of Food Banks to provide food to low-income families. TANF dollars are also spent on kinship care, so these are when children are not living with their parents anymore, living with other family members. Their support can be provided through the TANF program. There's also, of course, administration associated with these programs, and so those are the vital dollars to our county offices that help connect people with these services. There's child welfare initiatives. there's the ability for states to transfer part of their TANF dollars over to the Title 20, better known as the Social Services Block Grant Program, and that also is used to help with child welfare and also adult protective services. And then there's always legislative earmarks. Kind of the reason we're talking about this right now is because seeing these amount of unspent dollars could make this program susceptible to wanting to spend those dollars on something that certain legislators or different groups are seeking dollars for. So we'll move into the pie chart just so we can see the breakout of the expenses. That text is smaller than I wanted it to be. Sorry about that. But here you can see the core pieces of our overall TANF expenses that go to different areas. So, we're spending a big chunk of our TANF budget on childcare. Other big chunks, obviously, on the local administration and program funding, and then the direct cash assistance. So those are the biggest sections of what we're spending our TANF dollars on. And then I'll move ahead to just kind of thinking about what's next, and then I can open it up for if anyone has questions or things. We'd be happy to answer those, and obviously feel free to follow up with either me or Kelsey to talk more about this. But I mentioned earlier sustainability is the big question here. Ultimately, the state has spent several years of budgeting where we are, we're accumulating an underspend in the TANF program, and those dollars could have been helping poor families with children. And these are families in Ohio. Our eligibility for cash assistance is at 50% of the poverty level or below. So these are families living in deep poverty, and those dollars could have gone a long way in helping families over the last several years. Kind of the situation that we find ourselves in now is that we do need to make an enormously important, significant investment in bringing our child care system up to the quality standards by 2020, and then again by 2025. That comes with additional training, increased rates to providers, and then ultimately we want to get to a place where we're expanding eligibility for child care, which is not that we're not even dealing with that in this budget. So, I think certainly where we are now, there is a large amount of unspent dollars in the TANF program that are budgeted to be spent over the next several years on an important program, and that's child care. It's unfortunate that we have not been able to, as a state, think about and plan for a way to fund this important program in a sustainable way. We really have kind of, in the way I look at it, kind of use the TANF underspend as like, oh yes, we know we have a big expense coming up, here's our savings account. And I think we can universally across the board of the stakeholder and, even everyone who looks at this program, this is not a sustainable way to budget for childcare, and we think it's something that is vitally important and deserves the attention and investment that we have set out for increasing eligibility and increasing quality. We need to make the investment there. So I won't belabor that point. I think one other thing that the Advocates for a Housed Future group has been talking about is to look at how to get some dollars back into households with poor families who are currently on the Ohio Works First cash assistance portion of the program. So what we've talked about is increasing from here on out, increasing the dollar amount going to those families by $100 per month. That comes out to about $60 million per year. And that we know that elements of the program, and this could be like a whole other hour-long webinar, certain elements of the program or things that are funded through the program are kind of habitual, continual contributors to the underspend amount. So we think even going into the future, increasing the amount given to families through the cash assistance program every month by $100 is pretty sustainable. Kelsey has included here a link that you all can connect to that direct TANF services framework. So that'll show you the overall budgeting document, as well as some of the narrative that the department submitted along with their budget recommendations. And then I just quickly wanted to mention kind of, again, what's next. So, around the budget discussion, I think we'll continue to hear about TANF on the House and Senate sides. I don't know where we'll end up by June 30th on additional legislative earmarks and things, but it does not seem as though the administration, per their language in their TANF services framework, they don't foresee the need for any additional legislative earmarks, and really want to keep the focus of the program on kind of those core child care pieces, cash assistance, other supports in the community. Looking ahead, this probably seems like a weird term to you all, TANF 2030, but this is really where Advocates for Ohio's future is headed as it relates to TANF. I don't know, some of you on the call may remember that Community Solutions, about a decade ago, wrote a paper identifying a large amount of underspend in the TANF program. It did get spent on a couple of big initiatives, as well as, there was a recession in there, but we don't want to write this paper again in 10 years. So what we're trying to do collectively with AOF and, working in collaboration with the governor's administration and hopefully some legislative champions on this issue, is to really take a hard look at the structure of the program to say, we don't want to be underspending in these categories. We want the dollars in the communities with the families, helping to avoid emergencies. We know from our friends at Legal Aid that, often counties, they might have a plan for how they're spending dollars, but we don't really have a good sense of whether that really happens. So if someone shows up and says, this service might be helpful to me, we don't know how that happens in the community, and we do think that that's a part of what contributes to underspend, is that, we have these plans about things, but do they actually play out around the state? So we're trying to learn a lot about that. Legal Aid, again, has been really helpful. The County Department of JFS Directors Association has been extraordinarily helpful in reminding us of how the program came to be and why things are structured in a way that make it, not necessarily workable to address the needs of poor families. So there's a lot more that we're trying to learn and plan for, but this is why we're calling it the TANF 2030 plan, that we want to actually have a program that serves the populations that it aims to serve in a, sustainable way, and a way that's actually helping lift families up and out. So I will stop there. I don't know, Kelsey, you'll have to remind me of the mechanism for questions and things, but I think we have a couple minutes for questions, but then again, feel free to follow up. We'll send some of these materials we mentioned in a follow-up email.
Yes, thank you so much, Tara. And yes, please feel free to submit questions via the live chat feature. Type them in. So Tara and I will stay on the line here for a few minutes to see if any questions come in. But once again, we will be sending out a follow-up email with the access to this recording, as well as the slides and probably a couple other good pieces of information and some resources on TANF in Ohio. So we are here for you. So please go ahead and submit your questions if you have any. If not, we hope you have a wonderful Friday. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. We'll be discussing the sub-bill. At that point, hopefully it will have been considered in House Finance, as well as maybe even had its floor vote. So we'll see the final version of the budget bill that comes out of the House coming up on May 9th, I believe is the day. Whatever, 2 Fridays from now.
Friday, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Tara. Thank you. So yes, let us know if you have questions. All right. Yes, so the link within the webinar here, you cannot click on it, but when we do send around the slides, I will be available and we will send it as an attachment as well. So everyone will have access to the resource from the department. Thanks for the question. All right, everyone. Well, thank you again for joining us on this kind of dreary Friday. We will send out the information in just a few moments here, and enjoy your weekend, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good one.